Let's see how smart you really are. Mrs. Carol Denning wrote the problem on the board in big, slow strokes, a multivariate calculus equation she'd pulled from a university graduate exam, the kind of problem that stumped doctoral students on their worst days. She turned to face 26 seventh graders and pointed the chalk at the one boy who hadn't raised his hand. Marcus Webb, 12 years old, second-hand backpack, worn sneakers, sitting in the last row where she'd moved him after the first week of school. The classroom fell dead quiet. 26 kids holding their breath, and Marcus looked at the board for 4 seconds, just 4, then picked up his pencil. What Mrs. Denning didn't know was going to change everything before the end of that class period, starting with the expression on her face. Rewind to September. This is where it started. The first time Marcus Webb walked into room 214 at Lakeview Middle School, he was carrying a composition book that had run out of pages. Not because he'd been assigned that many notes, because he'd filled it himself, over the summer, working through problems he found online, in library books, in the margins of his older sister's college textbooks she'd left behind when she moved to Atlanta. Marcus was 12. He'd been doing calculus since he was 10, not because anyone taught him, because the day his father handed him a geometry workbook from a garage sale and said, "I can't help you with this, but you can figure it out yourself," Marcus had discovered something that would stay with him the rest of his life. Numbers didn't care who you were. Numbers didn't see his address in the East Side apartment complex or his mother's night shift badge from the hotel laundry. Numbers were honest. Numbers were fair. Marcus Webb loved them more than anything else in the world. His father, Raymond Webb, drove a city bus for 22 years. His mother, Gloria, worked the overnight linen shift at a downtown hotel, home by 6 a.m. in time to wake Marcus and his younger brother for school. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on Emmett Street, the kind of building where the elevator worked 3 days out of 7, and the mailboxes had been pried open so many times the locks were just for show. They were not poor in spirit. Raymond read every night. Gloria kept a shelf of library books above the television. When Marcus's math teacher in 5th grade told Raymond that his son had tested into a gifted and talented program, Raymond had driven straight to the school after his shift, still in his uniform, to make sure the transfer paperwork was filed correctly. He'd waited 90 minutes in that plastic chair. He did not complain. Marcus tested into the advanced track at Lakeview, 7th grade advanced mathematics, supposedly the highest offering at the school. He sat down on the first day and read through the entire textbook during the first week. By October, he was correcting problems on the board before the chalk was dry. Mrs. Carol Denning had taught 7th grade math for 17 years. She had a master's degree in education administration and a classroom organized with the precision of someone who believed strongly in systems. She assigned seats alphabetically and gave pop quizzes every Thursday. She had a phrase she used when students were falling behind. "This class is for students who are willing to work." She meant it as encouragement. It landed as threat. She believed in rigor. She believed she could tell, within the first 2 weeks, which students had potential and which ones were going to struggle regardless of what she did. She decided about Marcus within the first 2 weeks. He was too quiet. He didn't raise his hand the way the other students did, the eager, bouncing in the seat kind of hand raise she associated with engagement. He sat in the back and wrote in that composition book constantly, and she'd checked once and found it full of equations she didn't immediately recognize. She told herself he was probably copying from somewhere, probably distracted, probably a behavior problem waiting to surface. She'd had boys like him before. She told herself she knew the type. She moved him to the last row on the 15th day of school. Better sightlines for her. Less disruption, she said. For the students around him, Marcus moved without argument. He kept writing in his composition book. He kept getting every test question correct. These facts she held simultaneously without letting them change her conclusion. That was the thing about a closed mind. It could hold contradictions forever without noticing the weight. Every Thursday morning, Mrs. Denning wrote the week's challenge problem on the board at 7:45, before the students arrived. A single difficult problem, extra credit she called it, though she never actually awarded the credit in a way that changed anyone's grade. It was more of a performance, a way to show the class what real mathematics looked like. Something aspirational. She chose problems from competitions, from advanced textbooks, from the occasional college-level resource she'd bookmarked over the years. For the first 6 weeks, Marcus solved every Thursday challenge problem before the bell rang. Not quickly, she told herself. He must be looking them up. She'd started choosing more obscure sources. 2 weeks in a row, she'd picked problems from a regional mathematics Olympiad archive she'd found on a university library database, not indexed anywhere she knew of. Not the kind of thing a middle schooler was likely to stumble across. Marcus solved both. His work was on her desk before first period ended, shown in full, each step methodical and clean. She told herself he was getting help. She did not review his work with any curiosity. She graded it with a red pen and handed it back without comment. And when other students looked at Marcus's paper and asked how he'd done it, she changed the subject. Here's what she didn't know, what she'd never bothered to find out. Raymond Webb had contacted the school district's gifted education coordinator in October. He'd asked what the pathway was for a student who had exhausted the school's advanced offerings. He'd been told the district had a university partnership program for exceptional cases, a way for qualifying students to access college coursework. He'd asked for the application materials. He'd been told they'd be mailed. They never arrived. He called back twice. Left a message. No return call. He drove to the district office on a Saturday, the only day he didn't work, and was told the coordinator was not available and the program had a wait list. He left his phone number on a yellow sticky note on the front desk. 3 months later, nobody had called. That was the thing about systems built for a certain kind of family. They worked when you already knew how to make them work. When you knew which name to ask for and what language to use and which door to knock on, and how many times to knock. Raymond Webb was a man who drove a bus and filled out forms in neat block letters and called back twice and left his number. He did not know which door. Nobody had told him. Meanwhile, his son sat in the back of a 7th grade classroom solving graduate-level mathematics for no credit, and the teacher watching him had already decided what he was. The problem came to a head on a Tuesday. Mrs. Denning had scheduled a parent-teacher showcase, an evening event where students presented their term projects. Marcus had submitted his project on prime number distribution and the Riemann hypothesis, which he'd written in 32 pages with hand-drawn graphs because the school's computer lab printer had a 3-page limit for student jobs. Mrs. Denning had looked at it for approximately 90 seconds before handing it back with a note. Needs to be more grade appropriate. Resubmit using the assigned format. Marcus rewrote it. He used the assigned format. He kept the content. He turned in a project that fit on 8 pages and still contained mathematics that should not have been possible from a 12-year-old. She gave him a B- for presentation issues. His father found out about the grade on a Sunday when he was going through Marcus's backpack, the same backpack with the loose strap he kept meaning to fix and hadn't gotten around to. He found the project. He read it. Raymond Webb had not taken calculus in school. He'd taken general math, and he was good at it, and he knew enough to know that what he was reading was far beyond what he could evaluate. So he drove to the public library on his day off and asked a reference librarian to read it. The librarian, a retired physics professor named Dr. Howard Behrens, who volunteered Tuesday afternoons, read it in 15 minutes and looked up from the pages with an expression Raymond Webb did not immediately know how to interpret. "Where did your son learn this?" Dr. Behrens asked. "Himself," Raymond said. "Mostly." Dr. Behrens set the project down carefully, the way you set something down when you don't want it to get damaged. "Mr. Webb," he said, "this child needs to be in a different room." Raymond went home and called the school. He got Mrs. Denning's voicemail. He left a message. She called back 2 days later between classes and said that Marcus was a solid student, but that she had some concerns about his focus and classroom engagement, and that the B- was an accurate reflection of his meeting the assignment criteria, and that she appreciated Raymond's involvement. She said this in the pleasant, practiced tone of someone who had said almost exactly these words many times before. She did not ask a single question about the project's content. She did not mention Dr. Behrens. She had not read what Raymond called about. Raymond thanked her and hung up. And then the Tuesday happened. It was the kind of January morning that made the radiators in room 214 knock and hiss, and 26 7th graders sat in their coats longer than usual, waiting for the heat to decide whether it was coming. Marcus was in the last row with his composition book open. Mrs. Denning was in a bad mood. A parent had complained the day before about a test grade, and she'd had to defend herself to the assistant principal. And the morning had started wrong and gotten worse. She was explaining the concept of polynomial equations, standard curriculum. She wrote a sample problem on the board, routine textbook. From the back row, without raising his hand, Marcus said quietly, "The second coefficient should be negative." Every head in the room turned. Mrs. Denning turned, looked at the board, looked at Marcus. Her jaw tightened. She looked back at the board, and she looked for a long moment, because she needed a long moment. And what she saw when she looked was that he was right. The second coefficient should have been negative. She had written it wrong. She erased it, corrected it, said nothing. But something had cracked. She could feel the shift in the room, 25 other kids recalibrating, looking at Marcus in the back row, looking at the teacher who'd just been corrected, and said nothing. She recognized the feeling. She'd spent 17 years managing it. Authority, once questioned, even quietly, even correctly, needed to be reestablished. She turned to face the class. She had a decision in front of her, and she made it in less than a second, the way bad decisions are usually made. She walked to the board and wrote a problem. Not from the textbook, not from the competition archives. She pulled it from memory, a multivariate calculus optimization problem she'd encountered in a graduate seminar 15 years ago. The one that had taken her study group 3 sessions to work through, the kind of problem that had no business being on a 7th grade board. She wrote it in full, long, deliberate. She turned around. She pointed the chalk at Marcus Webb. "Let's see how smart you really are," she said. "Come solve it." The room went silent, not the productive silence of thinking, the uncomfortable silence of 25 children realizing something was happening that they didn't have words for yet. A few of them looked at the board and their faces showed what their mouths didn't say. "That's not 7th grade math." Marcus looked at the board, not at the teacher, not at his classmates, at the board. 4 seconds. He was still for 4 seconds, long enough that 2 students near the front later said they thought he was going to say he couldn't do it. Long enough that Mrs. Denning's chin lifted slightly with anticipation. Then Marcus Webb picked up his pencil, stood, walked to the front of the room, and started writing. He didn't ask for the chalk. He wrote in pencil in his composition book first, quickly 3 lines of notation, working through the first variable isolation, and then he stepped to the board, picked up the chalk, and began. His handwriting was small and precise. He did not hesitate. He did not look at his book again. He worked from the inside out, decomposing the optimization structure, handling the constraint equations cleanly, his steps following each other with the unhurried logic of someone who had been doing this kind of thinking for years in the back of a classroom where nobody was watching. He finished in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Mrs. Denning's face, which had started with the calm confidence of someone who'd already decided the outcome, had been changing for the last 2 minutes. The students closest to the front could see it. The slight forward lean, the pencil in her hand going still. The moment somewhere around the 3rd step when she stopped looking like she was waiting for a mistake and started looking like something she hadn't prepared for. Marcus set the chalk down and stepped back. He did not look at her. He looked at the board, reviewing his own work the way you review something you've already done correctly, but check out of habit. The room was completely, utterly silent. Mrs. Denning took 3 steps toward the board. She read what was there. She read it again. Her hand came up, not to erase, not to correct, just a reflexive gesture, the hand that reaches towards something it doesn't know how to hold. She lowered it. From the 2nd row, a girl named Priya said in a voice barely above a whisper, "That's right, isn't it?" Not a question. A statement. Mrs. Denning's mouth opened, closed from somewhere in the back of the room. Not Marcus, but a boy named Devin who sat next to him. Came a slow, quiet exhale that became unmistakably a single syllable of pure disbelief. And Mrs. Denning, who had called Marcus Webb to the board to humiliate him, who had spent 4 months deciding what he was and never bothering to check, stood in front of the 7th grade classroom and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. The mathematics on the board was not a mystery. It was completely, irreversibly, undeniably correct. She looked at Marcus. He was already walking back to his seat. She didn't call on anyone else for the rest of the period. What she also didn't know, what was about to matter enormously, was that sitting in room 214 that morning, visiting as a guest observer as part of the district's classroom review program, was Dr. Yolanda Price, Associate Superintendent for Academic Programs, there to observe general classroom function. seated in the back corner with a clipboard near enough to the board to have read every step. She had not planned to stay the whole period. She had been there for 51 minutes. She stayed. Dr. Price was in the hallway before the bell finished ringing. She caught Marcus at his locker. He'd gotten there before most of the other students, moving with the quiet economy of a kid who'd learned not to linger in hallways. She introduced herself simply, without her title, and asked if he had a few minutes. He looked at her the way children look at adults who approach them with calm authority, not afraid, but measuring. She asked him to walk her through one step of the problem, just one, to make sure she'd understood his notation correctly. He did, clearly, without a textbook, from memory. Dr. Price nodded slowly. Then she asked, "Has anyone tested you formally?" Marcus looked at her for a moment. "My fifth-grade teacher said I was gifted. Have you done the university partnership program?" He shook his head. "My dad called about that. Nobody called back." Dr. Price wrote something on her clipboard, tore the sheet off, handed it to Marcus. "That's my direct number. Tell your father to call me today. Not the main office, me." Standing in the parking lot of the transit depot on his break because he didn't want the background noise of the bus barn on an important call, he and Dr. Price spoke for 22 minutes. By the end of the call, Marcus had an appointment with the district's gifted assessment team for the following week, a meeting with the university partnership coordinator the week after, and Dr. Price's personal assurance that she would be following up directly. She also, without announcing it to anyone, added a note to the classroom review file for room 214. She did not discuss it with Marcus or Raymond. She simply documented what she had observed, the problem on the board, the student called on, the context. The file went to the principal's office, then to HR. The review process that followed was quiet and took several weeks and resulted in a formal conversation that Mrs. Carol Denning did not enjoy and could not argue her way out of. Because the mathematics on the board that January morning had been witnessed by the Associate Superintendent for Academic Programs, and the pattern documented in the classroom review file was not something that could be attributed to coincidence or interpretation. She was not fired. She was assigned to curriculum development work for the remainder of the year, in an office away from students. Her classroom was given to a substitute, then to a newly hired teacher. She returned the following September to a different grade level, with a coaching requirement under a performance improvement plan that specified, in writing, that observable student engagement was required across all demographics. Whether it changed her, no, one could say for certain, but the plan was in her file for 3 years. The following September, Marcus Webb started 9th grade at Lakeview and simultaneously enrolled in his first university-credited mathematics course through the district's partnership with State College, multivariable calculus. He was 13. He finished with the highest grade in the class. By the time he was 16, he had completed 5 college-level mathematics and physics courses. His file crossed the desk of the director of admissions at 3 universities, who had a standing arrangement with the district to flag exceptional cases. One of them sent a letter that Raymond Webb read 3 times, standing at the mailbox on Emmett Street before going inside, sitting down at the kitchen table, and calling his wife at the hotel laundry. She answered on the second ring. He read her the letter over the phone. She had to set down her work. She stood in the break room with her hand over her mouth while her son's future arrived in her ears one sentence at a time. Marcus received a full scholarship, mathematics and theoretical physics. He was the youngest admitted student in the program's 60-year history. The day he left for college, Raymond Webb drove him to the campus in the city bus, not the route bus, the family car, a 12-year-old Civic with a tape deck, and helped him carry 2 bags up 3 flights of stairs to a dormitory room that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and possibility. Raymond stood in the doorway of the room, looking at his son arranging his books on the shelf, the composition books stacked neatly, the library books, the one photograph of the family he'd taken from the living room, and he didn't say much. He was not a man of many words in moments that mattered. He just put his hand on Marcus's shoulder for a moment, and Marcus put his hand over his father's, and they stood like that for a few seconds in a dormitory room on the 3rd floor of a university that had not, 3 years earlier, known his son existed. Raymond drove home and went back to work the next morning. His bus route took him past Lakeview Middle School at 7:52 a.m., the same time it always had. He looked at the building as he passed, The way you look at a place that held something important that's been returned to you. He did not feel anger exactly. Something quieter, something that had waited a long time to be resolved. Numbers don't care who you are. His son had always known that. Someday Raymond thought everyone else would too. He pressed the accelerator. The bus moved on through the morning, clean and steady and on time.